Honourable Members, I have received a letter from the Honourable Darren Hughes seeking to debate under Standing Order 380 the resignation of the Minister of Consumer Affairs, the Honourable Heather Roy. This is a particular case of recent occurrence involving ministerial responsibility. Not every ministerial resignation will lead to an urgent debate being accepted. However, having carefully considered this application, I have decided to err on the side of allowing the debate. The application is therefore accepted. I call on the Honourable Darren Hughes to move that the House take note of a matter of urgent public importance.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Darren Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, I so move. Mr. Speaker, we've seen some extraordinary events in Parliament in just the last 24 hours as the key government starts to fall apart at the wheels. Because what's happened over here with the ACT Party, sir, is a party of just 5 MPs who are taking the government further and further to the right, couldn't even agree on keeping their confidence and supply agreement with the government intact. And what do we get from the Prime Minister about this? Not a word. Not a word. We've had a Minister of the Crown leave office in our country and no one's allowed to know why. No one's allowed to have an explanation about what it's about. No one gets told how a confidence and supply agreement that leads to a government of New Zealand is all of a sudden bereft and not being taken seriously at all. And, sir, there are several key points of constitutionality that I think come into play here, and one of them should be of most concern to the Māori Party and to United Future, because it seems, sir, that the Prime Minister can arbitrarily rewrite confidence and supply agreements after they've been signed at a time of a general election. And I would have thought that's a very serious thing indeed for a small party signing up to support a government not knowing whether or not they are going to get the opportunity for the words in that document to be taken seriously as the coalition continues. Sir, I refer to the confidence and supply agreement that the National Party signed with ACT. Most curiously, it sets out something I guess the Prime Minister would describe as being slightly aspirational, because it says the relationship between ACT and National will be based on good faith and no surprises. Well, I would have thought it was a day of surprises yesterday in the office of the Honourable Heather Roy as she turned up for work to be told she was about to be knifed by her parliamentary colleagues, and this was all going to be done, and an ousting was going to be done in secret and not to be communicated to the public what was driving it and what the reasons were behind it. But except, sir, what happened was today in the newspaper we were able to find out one of the reasons, and it's a very serious point, because Rodney Hyde sat in this Parliament for 14 years and he sat here in judgment of every other party and every other politician. He sat here holier than thou. He sat here as the perk buster, as the person who was going to be Mr. Transparency, Mr. Accountability, Mr. Openness. He was a cut above most other parliamentarians and most other parties. And what we've found out is that in the 18 short months that Rodney Hyde's long career as an opposition member, sitting outside the glass house throwing rocks, now that he's inside the engine room of government, nearly every single decision he's taken has shown that he's not up to the job of being a minister, let alone a party leader. Sir, he was the person who went around the country complaining that ministerial standards had slipped under previous governments because not enough action was taken by Prime Ministers of the time. Yet he's the same person, sir, who went through a press conference yesterday and wouldn't tell the public of New Zealand why he had taken measures to politically execute his deputy and the effect that would have on the executive government of this country as a minister was driven from office because of a tawdry backroom deal done by the ACT Party. Sir, what's really clear here is a question of accountability from Mr Hyde, because it seems that Mrs Roy, in her role as Associate Minister of Defence, had significant concerns about the security of the paperwork and documentation in her office. The New Zealand Herald makes very clear today, sir, that the Associate Minister was concerned that documents related to the defence portfolio were being taken without her permission from her desk in her ministerial office here in Parliament. And, sir, that is very serious indeed for that to happen. Those documents are given to ministers on a basis of confidentiality. They are often classified documents, and the minister, Mrs Roy, the former minister, was quite rightly concerned at the extent to which the confidentiality of her papers was being abused by Rodney Hyde. And so what did she do about it? She went to Rodney Hyde and asked him about it, and he bullied her. He tried to bully her.
Point of order, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
I don't like to interrupt my colleague, but and I know it's not. We're not allowed to point to the absence of a member in the House, but I just wondered whether pointing to the absence of a party is allowed, given the importance of this debate.
The member will resume his seat. It is not a point of order, the Honourable Darren Hughes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that the research notes are being done right at the moment, because the ACT Party are going to have to front up at some point as the party that put every other party to a higher test, because they said they were going to be better in government than everyone else. And they sat there in this Parliament for 12 years in opposition to national governments and Labor governments, and they were going to bring a higher standard of ministerial accountability. And what we've seen with the behaviour of the ACT Party deserves Rodney Hyde to come down to this House and tell us what went on, because we're talking about the political career of a Minister of the Crown, sir. But I want to return to this point about the defence documents, because those defence documents is one of the critical issues as to why apparently Mr Hyde acted against his minister. And Mrs Roy went to him and raised her concerns about the fact that he had been sneaking papers, classified defence documents from her desk that he was not entitled to receive, and she checked that. And Rodney Hyde acted against her in that respect. And when she was bullied by Mr Hyde on that, the matter was then raised by the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister knew that in that office there was concerns about the documents related to the defence portfolio. But yesterday, when Mr Key was asked about why Heather Roy had been removed from office, he said, "I've got no idea." We're expected to believe that John Key had no idea whatsoever why a minister of his government left office yesterday. This is hugely concerning, sir, to the parliamentary opposition, and I believe to the public, that the Prime Minister is prepared to argue that he had no idea why a minister was forced to leave office. Sir, we're also told by way of the newspaper today that the new Deputy Leader of the ACT Party, John Boscawen, lodged his challenge for the Deputy Leadership on the 5th of August. It is impossible to believe that from the 5th of August through to the 18th of August, or 17th of August yesterday, that John Key was not advised of this challenge by the ACT Party. We know how close John Key is to Rodney Hyde. We know that it's John Key who is propping up the leadership of Rodney Hyde at the present time, because they are political soulmates in that respect. And from the 5th of August through until yesterday, it is impossible to believe John Key's assertion that he had no idea that this was going on. It's even more impossible to believe or to accept or to even understand that, having heard about the coup, if he was indeed aware of it, he never thought in any of his conversations with Rodney Hyde to say, "Why is this happening? What's going on here? Why are you thinking of changing your Deputy Leader?" And if it's going to be the responsibility of the ACT Party alone about their ministerial responsibilities, then why was Heather Roy's name specifically written into the confidence and supply agreement? If the Prime Minister, Mr Key, says it's simply a matter for the support parties who they supply as their ministers, why was it written down in black and white that it would be Heather Roy and Rodney Hyde who would be the ministers in this government? John Key yesterday changed the political history here with the collective responsibility of the Cabinet and the Cabinet Manual, with a new term which he called the implied concept of ministerial work. So it's now so it doesn't matter what you write in black and white as you sign up to a government and go to the Governor-General and say we've got the numbers to run the country. We now work on a principle called the implied concept of the Key government about who gets ministerial warrants. This is impossible to take seriously. It is impossible for there to be credibility on it at the point that that ministerial warrant was taken away by Mr Hyde. Secondly, sir, if Mr Hyde was so keen to move against Mrs Roy because he was so anxious to get his hands on those defence documents that Mrs Roy so objected to, why, when all the portfolios were redistributed yesterday, did the ACT Party decide to give up the defence portfolio? So you've got Rodney Hyde going through the minister's desk, checking out all the papers that he's not entitled to. Well, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition makes a very unkind suggestion, but there he was going through her papers, taking her ministerial documents without her permission, and because apparently this was so important that he was aware of what was happening in the defence portfolio. But the whole time, Mr Hyde was planning on giving up that portfolio as soon as he could get rid of Heather Roy. But here's the real thing, you know. The real reason we think, we don't know, we've got to assume here, the real reason that this minister has been summarily dismissed behind closed doors in the ACT Party caucus room is that Mr Hyde believes she was being far too critical of his leadership. Well, she'll never be lonely in that particular respect. But if I could say to Mrs. Roy, she will not suffer alone in that regard. But it's a bit rich of Mr. Hyde to sack a minister, to execute a minister and keep it a secret, when he himself is on record going around this country when